mentorship. And what this does is to be able to bring in those who have made it in these communities to talk to the pupils. And we've seen massive improvement, especially in some of the schools in which we've been able to go into, and even the openness with which the pupils will be able to share their issues, because students, pupils are human beings. When exams show up, they are, of course, they are bound to panic, they are bound to get afraid. All of us have been afraid of certain things, especially exams at some point. But how that fear is also managed, because teachers have expectations, and the expectations of the teachers are to be top 100 in the country. How are these expectations therefore managed, and how are they communicated to the pupils so that they are able to know that even that D material can be able to move from my D to a C minus or even to an A plane?
Right. Because
that is a process that then need to be done in a much more holistic and conclusive manner.
But you know, the history of school fire tragedies dates back even way to 1991, when you had St. Kizito Mixed School, and that had 19 girls who perished in that fire. But Dr. Mukwana, just picking from where Kevin Osido has left off, we've seen a lot of reforms that have been done in the Ministry of Education. We saw the abolishment of the ranking of schools in examinations, and that the reason given was to reduce the pressure on the students, you know, in terms of performance, and a lot of other issues that are put together just to ensure that students are not as pressured, you know, as, you know, because that was termed initially as the cause of these school fires. But what more then, as a community, can we do?
Thanks, Michelle. As always, thank you for hosting us. First and foremost, Michelle, my heart bleeds literally for those young girls who perished yesterday. My condolences to their parents and to the nation at large. Michelle, to give credit where it is due, Dr. Matiang'i has done quite a bit in making sure that there is safety in schools. If you look at the Education Act of 2013, Basic Education Act of 2013, and the Basic Education Regulations of 2015, there is a comprehensive provision on how the schools ought to be run, how they ought to be managed, including the role of the Board of Management in schools. Now, I happen to be a board member in one of the schools, Upcountry Shitari Secondary School, and I know that the issue of arson or the issue of fire in schools is one that can be tackled. At the moment, if we talk about these fires in Moi Girls and Sigoti and the other one,
Chuka Boys last night.
Boys, and the ones before, Chianguni Mix, if you remember, and the St. Kizitos. We can only presuppose that the fire was arson. But there are situations where the fire is accidental. The long and short of it is that there is a manual for safety guidelines in schools. I believe that the people who are going to investigate what happened in Moi Girls will begin from that point. Were the safety guidelines, were the safety manuals enforced? The answer is simple. If they were not enforced, then of course the officers in charge of the schools are culpable. Beyond that, any other talk would really be a speculation, and I would not want us to rush on apportioning responsibility, because as it stands now, we do not know the cause of that fire.
Right.
And if you heard what the deputy teacher in Sigoti Girls spoke, she sounded having been very meticulous. In fact, to the extent that, you know, what happened seemed to be unnatural. Right. I mean, she has been there a few minutes ago, then there is a fire, they rush there. I mean, she had been so meticulous in what she had done. So it is difficult. In the case of Moi Girls, of course, it's tricky, because it said it happened at 2 a.m.
Right.
At 2 a.m., everyone was asleep. So we can only leave it to the forensic experts who are already on the scene, the police, who are very thorough when they want to do their job. Very thorough. They can actually get to the root cause of the problem. And then, of course, Dr. Matiang'i, who has been very good at his work, and hope that we get a report in a short time. In the meantime, all the recommendations that have been made, as Kevin has put, ought to be implemented.
Right.
And I trust that Dr. Matiang'i is equal to the task in that regard.
And when you take a look at page 3 of the standard, at the bottom there's Ministry of Education, Schools, Safety and Health Guidelines outlined there. So do grab your copy of the paper for it. Among them is keys to the doors should always be kept by the dormitory master or the ministry to the dormitory of the prefect. But then again, that also comes into the issue of how should the doors be locked? Should it be locked from outside? Should it be locked from inside? There's also, according to the safety standards, doors at each end. The dormitories should have doors at each end additional emergency exit at the middle of the dormitory. All doors should also open outside and not inside towards the dormitory. All windows must be without grills. Majority of schools across the country have not adhered to these guidelines. So the question is then, even as we wind up from this, whose onus is it? Kevin, let me ask you, is it the school administration, is it the school board, Dr. Mukwana, or is it the Ministry of Education? Let me begin with you, Dr. Mukwana, then.
The onus is on a number of people. In a school, there are two tiers of responsibility. There is the board of management, who is the eye of the ministry. And then there is the principal and the deputy, who is the eye of his employer, the Teacher Service Commission, as established by the Teacher Service Commission Act, and also for the ministry. So that means, therefore, that the onus is on these two people. The board of management ought to have ensured that the CEO of the school, who is the principal, has actually complied per these safety guidelines. So if you want to apportion responsibility in the school setup, we start from the BOM, because it's their responsibility. They are Dr. Matiangi's eyes in that school.
Right.
So I'm sure Dr. Matiangi will be calling the board of management in Moi Girls and say, hey guys, did you do your job? And then it cascades downwards. We have the CEO, and the TS will be calling the employee and asking her, Madam, did you do your job? So in terms of where the buck stops, it is twin-pronged. The BOM as the supervisors of the work going on, and the teacher, who is the head teacher, as the CEO, the implementing officer of all the guidelines and the that have to be done in school.
Right.
Yes.
Kevin, parents have been accused of delegating their parental roles to the teachers and, the board of, management in most schools. Yes. But should parents also be accountable for this? Because when you're taking your child to the school, you should also be, as a parent, aware of these safety guidelines. You shouldn't be able to assess whether the safety guidelines have been followed by this particular school. Can we absolve the parents of responsibility here?
In fact, mine would have probably been where to lay responsibility is at the doorstep of the parents. Because Michelle have participated in a process of an identification process for my friends, my nieces, my relatives, for schools. And there are specific things that you look out for. And in this kind of scenario, if you looked at many of those parents, they were quite angry, they were tearing, and quite really shocked about what was happening within the vicinity of especially Moi Girls. And the question I kept asking myself was, what sort of steps did they take in identifying Moi Girls to be the school for their girls? Of course, Moi Girls is a top performer, and many of us, many parents, look at the performance of the schools, which in this case should not be, in my view, the only prerequisite that we are looking at. Security and safety really come top in the list. Secondly, parents need to be able to engage with the structures, like Dr. is saying, the board of management, the principals, the deputies, and even the head teachers. The question is, how many of us make transect walks and checks into these schools as parents? When we have already been informed about the changes, because these changes will require resources, and these resources are financial resources. The finances will come from the parents. When you see this X amount in the school fees, the fee structure of the student, how many of us ever bother to ask, ini and ini, what will the school use this for? Because you only see this happening when schools are buying buses. That we ask teachers, why are you leaving us so much to be able to buy a bus, yet my kid is a Form 4, he may never, she may never use the bus. That is the point when we generate this kind of discussions. But we never go into the reports, or the ministry requires you to make X changes. Have you been able to remove the grills? Are we seeing the keys being placed? What is the responsibility of the dome prefect or the boarding master in a situation where a fire takes place at 2 a.m.? Who is supposed to press the alarm bell? Where is the alarm bell? Because these are things that parents now need to begin to engage with. And the engagement is not supposed to be, in my view, antagonistic. It is supposed to be a participatory process. Right now, until yesterday, we had parents going into schools for parents' meetings. What are we engaging with? What are we discussing in these meetings? Are we going to be the ones who are going to pinpoint issues and not generate solutions? Or are we going to be problem solvers? Yes, and so in this scenario, in my view, yes, of course, the questions that need to be asked are to the board of management and also the school administration so far as the principals and the head teachers are concerned. But I want to take the place to also bring in the parents to this, because the questions we ask ourselves when we are taking our kids to these schools, what are these specific questions? And in my view, security and safety really now need to
be one of them.
Yeah.
All right, your addition, Dr. Mukwana, very briefly before we move on.
Yes, Michelle, I want to just add up, but also clarify the management of schools. As I told you, I have the privilege of sitting in a board of school, Electoral secondary school specifically. The management as currently is in the running of schools, there is no shortage of guidelines. I'll tell you. The parents have what you call the Parents Association.
Right.
They have a representative who sits with us on the board. And I can assure you that whatever the parents have to say many times holds sway, because they are literally the financiers of the school and their main stakeholders. The children, the head boy actually sits with me on my board. And we get first-hand information of what it is that the children want. The challenge that might be in most schools is implementation. And in my case, for instance, when I went into this board, I'll share with you that I found so much was not running as per the Basic Education Act of 2013 and the Basic Education Regulations of 2015. And I put my foot down. As I speak, without going into details, I have a big beef with the principal whom I found there. Because 3/4 of what the law dictates was not being done. But because most of our parents are not so literate, and because, especially in the countryside, most parents take the principal's words for the law. They know the principal knows it all. The principal, ashasema. The principal, some principals, not all, some are doing a good job, but some principals are taking the parents for a ride. And finally, the board of management. Some of us who have been taken to this board of management are yet to transit mentally to know that the Basic Education Act of 2013 requires of us more active and aggressive supervision of the schools. In fact, my biggest battle now with my principal is that he is of the view that our work is to go there, have a cup of tea, have ugali, listen to his report, and then go home. To the contrary, my responsibility as the chairman of the board is to ask each and every question and make sure it is being done. So I supervise him, without necessarily, of course, bulldozing, but I supervise him. So if the board of management did their work, they were more present. I make trips to that school every month, literally. I have contacts of the head boy and the head girl on my phone. I have contacts of a select number of parents. The idea being that as a board of management, you must understand that the buck stops with you when such issues happen. You saw it in Maseno when Mr. Tula was in trouble.
Yes.
You saw when the board of management tried to come to his defense, and reasonably, the board of management was disbanded. That is how serious the board of management has to operate. And if it does so, if the principals cooperate with the board of management, and if the principals also transit from their old mentality, where they thought that they are the bosses in schools, they are not answerable to anyone apart from the TSC, then these incidents and many others of indisciplinary schools will be less and less as the day progresses.
Interesting take on the issue. Kagucha, your final comments on this?
Yeah, you know, there's a time that the president said that security starts with us. And there's an issue of all of us exercising our due diligence at every level, including the students and including the parents and the school administration. Yeah, but again, to me, there's no way the buck would stop with the parents. The buck always stops at the authorities, especially where we are talking about the school administration. Because if you look at the ministries, they have guided the schools, as Dr. says, they have done very nice guidelines, and they have given them to the schools, especially after all these school fires that we have had. What remains is a strict implementation. It is difficult for a parent to use Osindo. It's very difficult for a parent to look at the safety features of a school when they are deciding where they are going to take their kid. It will be very difficult. At that point, every parent wants to take their kid to a good school. Moi Girls happens to be one of the good schools in the city that every parent would want to take their kid. And so when I'm deciding to take my kid to Nairobi School or even to Moi Girls, I wouldn't be going to the school first to check if they have a padlock, if they have the keys hung that, it would be very difficult. It would even be actually something that would be impossible. Yeah, so I would want to say that, of course, we do have PTAs. The parents are also incorporated in the leadership and the management of the school. The responsibility of the parents, I think, would go as far as those people who are now in the board of management representing the parents. But I would want to say that it's important for the school administrations to ensure that they take keen interest in ensuring that some of those safety features are actually adhered to. And not only in schools, even in our workplaces. I mean, even, of course, even in a studio like this, if fire, of course, was to break out here, Michelle, one of the things that maybe you should have shown us, our staff here, is how...
Don't worry, we're well protected here. We have,
so it's something that we actually need to be very conscious about it in our homes, in our workplaces, even in everywhere, actually. And just like we do talk about accidents, you know, at times we say, and there are very serious campaigns that have been done about passengers in matatus, that they need to speak out when they see something is not happening well. But remember, it's something that has to do with the driver, the conductor, the authorities on the road, even the passengers themselves. So it's something that we all have to be very conscious about, and we have to work towards. And I think as far as the authorities are concerned, they have guided us properly. So it is up to us as a community to create a culture of consciousness on these safety issues.
All right,
Michelle, without taking a lot of your time, I reiterate that the buck stops with the board of management, the principal and the deputy. It only goes up now to the sub-county director of education, because there is also a department of quality assurance, which is supposed to make periodic visits, because it's called quality assurance. They are supposed to make periodic visits to the school. So when the heads begin rolling, the director of quality assurance in the sub-county, then up to the county, will also have to answer questions.
So it is clearly an issue of accountability and implementation, even as you know, we express our deepest condolences to the families that have lost their children. Quick recovery to those who are battling injuries in hospitals. But gentlemen, let's move away from matters education and focus on page 5 of the Standard this morning. Night of Intrigues, as you know, this is with regard to the secrets of the night that gave Uhuru his, or Raila rather, his court win. So that story continues on page 5 of the paper. It is said to be a night of intrigues, as there was uninvited guests, unwanted calls, and a short-lived tie. So a lot, of course, happened behind the scenes after the hearing finished, and you know, between then and when the ruling was given by the judges. So let's take a look at this in a bit more detail, considering we have lawyers here in studio. So the court's decision apparently somehow had leaked to boardrooms the night before the decision was read out to the country, and that is also the reason why some lawyers, you know, representing the respondents did not show up in court. But it is said that Justice Maraga initiated a vote of conscience movement among the judges, because initially it is said that it was a 3-3 situation. 3 judges supporting the nullification and 3 judges in favor of upholding the decision of the IEBC. But one of the judges is said to have switched sides as on conscience grounds, rather, to support the invalidation of the election. Dr. Mukwana, what does this say about the judiciary, especially the fact that Chief Justice David Maraga is said to have led this vote of conscience movement? Okay,
thank you, Michelle. Now we can discuss a bit more freely.
It's true.
Now that the decision has been...
Without the sub judice.
Precisely, without risking being cited for the sub judice.
Which is something that we should actually kill in this country. The sub judice thing doesn't hold water at all.
On certain cases.
On all cases.
Yeah, shouldn't. The night of intrigues. Michelle, I explained last time here that whichever way this decision goes, there'll be unhappiness. And on the night before this judgment being delivered, as your reporters have rightly captured, it was a night of intrigues, many uninvited guests. The truth of the matter is that these judges have families, these judges have associates. They live in our society. You saw the president of the Supreme Court, David Maraga, in church yesterday.
The other day.
So really, there is no total sieve on the flow of information. It is just to what extent of infiltration would it be. But to their credit, they remained quite confidential, at least to the wider public. If the boardrooms knew, we didn't know.
But I understand at 7:46 a.m., the day the verdict was to be read out, there was a tweet by one David D. terming the 4 judges who upheld, or rather nullified the election as the saviors of the country. That was at 7:46 a.m. Judgment was read at about 11:30
Yes, it is possible, Michelle.
Actually, even the night before, the word was already out that there was going to be a rerun. So as much as there was conscience, and there was also they had sealed themselves from the intrigues from outside, the word was actually out. In fact, even when I was going to the media, I remember I was on one of the media stations that morning, one of the TV stations, and one of the reporters, they actually asked me, are you aware that this is going to happen? In fact, he told me, now I think we're in trouble. I told them I was not aware. Personally, I was not aware. But I realized that the word was already out the previous night, what was actually going to happen. And that is why you see even some of the advocates did not turn up in the morning. But again, look at the issue of consciousness. There are different schools of thought or different approaches that we have when we are looking at some of these judgments. Even the judges, the way they think. There's something we call the positivist school of thought. This is where a judge would prescribe to the rule of law and the rule of law only. Then you also have the moralist or the naturalist school of thought or approaches in how judgments are made. These are people who will lean more towards what they think is right and wrong. So they will be guided more by other factors like their moral standings, even some of them that they have inherited right from birth and their upbringing, what they think is right and what is wrong, religious beliefs, they will subscribe more to that. Yet we then have the other school of thought where the positivist one, as I say, where we actually look at the law as it is. And that is what then informs what kind of a decision then the judge will actually reach to. So in this case, the CJ comes as a person who subscribes to the school of thought or the approach of moralist, naturalist, and maybe more of even more of influence from the religion and his upbringing, so that when he is making a decision, he will at some point want to put aside so much of what are the facts, what is the law, what does it say, and be influenced a little bit more also by what he thinks or what he perceives to be right and wrong.
All right. Dr. Mukwana.
Yeah, my colleague will be right, but for me, so that we do not confuse the public, I think, Michelle, it will help our viewers if we put the decision of the judges in the context of the evidence that was tendered. Because, as we've said here before, the anchor of the petitioner's claim was 5-pronged, but without going into those details. The transmission was the main anchor of the petitioners.
Right.
What the defense lawyers did, they spent more time on Form 34A and then skipped the transmission and went to the numbers. So the argument always was that, look, 34A ndio msema kweli. That is true. And so 34A has given us 8.2 million. But NASA was saying, look, ladies and gentlemen, 34A between the polling center and Bomas has been bastardized. It is not the original 34A. So when finally these judges met, and if you had the questioning style of Philomena Mwilu and even Maraga and Smokin Wanjala and Lenaola, the 4 who supported the invalidation, their question hinged on this 34A. Number 1, did it have the security features? You saw that some did not have. 2, did this Form 34B's have serialization? Some did not have. Were these forms and votes that finally President Uhuru got, can they be accountable? Where do the 5 go? You had that question to Counsel Michel when he said, no, there were 6, but where are the 5? He was unable to explain. So based on that, there are those judges who stuck to that evidence and the case turned on that. If you listen to the dissenting opinion of Honorable Juang and Honorable Njoki. They did not deny that indeed there were no lapses. In fact, in the dissenting opinion, they said, yes, there were lapses. But those lapses were not adequate to impact hugely on the ultimate result. And that is what had been going. That is the string that had been all through the case. Even the defense, Honorable Muite, Honorable Ngate, were saying, yes, there are errors. But look, those errors are so small, they could not have impacted to affect the 8.2. So for me, the decision by these judges, the 4 judges, hinged on the fatality of the transmission. And the goose of those defendants got cooked when the IEBC started playing funny with the access to the service.
To the IEBC service.
Yes.
So we'll be discussing what next for discredited IEBC, but this decision has not been received well by all quarters. Another conversation we'll be having on its own. But Kevin, considering what Dr. Mukwana is saying, transmission was the main anchor of that petition by the opposition. Just yesterday, President Uhuru Kenyatta, speaking at State House, had an interesting question. So they've nullified the presidential election, but these results, the same transmission system also transmitted results for the governor, which, Chief Justice David Baraga sent 47 judges all across the country to witness the swearing in. The same system was used in the transmission of other results, MCA, Member of Parliament. Why is it that we're upholding these elections and nullifying the presidential election?
Michelle, probably before I delve deeper into that, just on the discussion you've been having about uninvited guests and unwanted calls, you know that the history of this country has been, and if you look at the government itself, the three levels of government where we have the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature, Kenya's democratic engagements have been that the three are supposed to work together. But over time, we've seen the judiciary getting much more lived off, and tyranny of numbers in Parliament, both Senate and the National Assembly, clinging very closely with the executive. That is the office of the president and the deputy and all that. And what happened in 2013, in my view, is one of those things that I would say that truly affected the conscience of these judges. And if you listen to those who are privy to the CJ's actions, they'll tell you that he asked them, do we want to be regarded as the 2013 style? Because really you don't see a scenario where a CJ presides over a presidential petition and then in a few days he resigns so unceremoniously. What does that mean to the judiciary, and especially for a developing democracy like for Kenya? So in my view, I think and I believe that these are uninvited guests, because it was expected that the president would then, or whoever, would make a call to the CJ and tell him, unajua nini, hii kitu mpaka ifanywe hivi. But I think that because we're also talking about independent institutions, and so what is this independence of the institution? In my view, this really presents a very positive progress insofar as our independence of institutions is concerned, and how the decisions are supposed to be taken. And take note that the CJ said, before I read the ruling, I want to say this, that the infidelity of our country lies in three things: its constitution, its people, and the fear of God. I think that those three things really, if Kenyans can be able to embrace those three things, including even the manner in which this decision is being taken, and I think that now that leads me to move on to the next thing. The president's remarks, I think, are quite hurtful. They are unfortunate, and coming from a person who is supposed to be safeguarding the unity, because presidency is really to the level that you can be able to bring all these Kenyans. In any country, people want to believe in peace, love, and harmony, as so says our national anthem. And so if we are going to be looking at how we take this decision, and I remember that the president and his deputy were very at the forefront of telling the opposition, be ready to accept the ruling of the court. Why is it very different right now? In 2013, we saw the same thing happen. Be ready to to accept the ruling of the court. And people said, we accept it and we move on. Why are we saying we respect it, but we do not, but we shall revisit? Because then that also invalidates what we're calling independence of institutions. Because what is this thing that we are revisiting? And it is not very fair, because we are now hearing of politicians like Senator Kipchumba Murkomen saying, tutarudi kuangalia hii maneno. And the undertones and even the body language of how all these things are being said, I think are not to the spirit of bringing this country together and looking at the manner, the environment within which Kenyans operate in. This country is actually split right in the middle. It's a 50-50 scenario. And how the president, in his magnanimity, and I've always said this, that he really needs to be the man who will stand at the top of all these games. He needs to now present himself as a person who will be able to bring Kenya together. And I like his several and constant references to peace, peace, peace. We want to see that peace in his messaging, in his narrative, and even in the manner in which he is taking the verdict of the court.
All right, so we'll be discussing the president's remarks later on because that is, it is a whole different conversation altogether. Yeah. But Kuguchi, even as you give your thoughts on the same, let's take a look at page 7 of the Standard this morning. What is next for discredited IEBC? Because there is pressure to deliver a credible election in the next few days. There's internal pressure from NASA as well to have, the Wafula Chebukati and the CEO also have a legal action taken against them. Where do you think this is likely to go next?
The issue of the judgment that was done recently, I agree with Osido here that it's okay, the independence of the court has actually been stamped, which is a positive thing for our democracy and for our country. In fact, Kenya will be one of the references world over in coming days, and CJ Maraga has won himself a place in the discussions globally. But then one of the issues that comes is when you're dealing with issues of this magnitude, there is all the need to put a little bit more effort in ensuring that what you're doing may not have negative repercussions, especially if there's some fact that actually 1.4 million people voted more to Uhuru than to Raila. What would happen is that in this, there's something. Let me just complete my statement. Then you can raise the. There's something we normally say that when we are dealing with criminal, for example, criminal cases, one of the things that the judges should always think about is they need to. They would be more ready to set free a criminal than to make a decision that then would jail an innocent person. It would be better in that case. So in this case then, what we are saying is that if you are to give the benefit of doubt, for example, that 1.4 million Kenyans more voted for this side other than this side, then there was need to do a little bit more. For example, where we say that a form came and it was not serialized, at times, it's a possibility also that some of the staff of IEBC may also want to to do funny things also, to provide some what would you call it, some ingredients for a case in future, some evidence. Even how it was being picked out, the evidence, it was also very questionable. And one thing I would have done if I was Maraga is this. We have a form here, it is not serialized. It shows the results which are signed, and it is in doubt and nobody is able to explain about it. One of the things I would have done is also to ask for the ballot boxes to be presented in court. Remember, one of the things, because I was actively involved in this election, one of the things that NASA did in all the polling stations was to seal off ballot boxes. So there were two seals. There was the IEBC seal, and then there was also the NASA seal. They provided their agents with all their seals. So the IEBC, after they sealed the ballot box, NASA also sealed the ballot box with their seal, and that happened across board. So one of the things I would have done is to ask for this ballot box to be brought, and then we would sample where we have forms which are not either signed or they have this kind of a problem. We would have sampled some of those ballot boxes and actually count one by one of those votes to see if indeed, even though this form is not serialized as has been put, what do the results which are presented on that form
tally with the ballot papers? I understand what you're saying, but remember, just before this prosecution of this hearing began, there was an incident in Embakasi where suspected IEBC officials or alleged IEBC officials are accused of having destroyed presidential ballot boxes. And we also had NASA coming out to say it is now impossible to actually verify the decision even from the ballot boxes which have been tampered with. But that is a decision, of course, that has already been factored in by the court. Let's move on to now what is next for the IEBC, which will have to conduct this election. Let me come to you, Kevin.
For IEBC, there are lots of things because, one, there are lessons learned. And I liked the statement by the chairman he came and said we're inviting the DPP to be able now to come in, and given what the court has already said, we want to wait for the full ruling in 21 days. We want to look at it. In the meantime, we invite the DPP to come, because we are talking about criminal cases here. The fact that people are even destroying ballot papers, the fact that people are not signing papers, the fact that you have double signatures, people signing for others, you know, impersonation of signatures, all these issues are really criminal to that extent. And the fact that the chairman of the commission is now inviting the DPP, I think for me is a positive gesture. That, from as far as the commission is concerned, I hope my friend Chiloba will also come and speak for the secretariat, and because a lot of these issues, really, from the chairman's perspective, were much more administrative than decision-making issues. And that, therefore, presents a platform or a space for the CEO also to be able to present his case and say, this is what we think. And not again, Michelle and all of us, that elections are not done in a vacuum. Elections are multi-sectoral processes. And I'm happy because our organization was also involved in this process in an extent to be able to just look at what is happening and how we learn lessons. And I think that IEBC was really meticulous in the work that they were doing. And there may be a lot of gaps that were missed, and I think that if we are moving into the next process in the next 58 days, then those are gaps that if the commission is willing to be able to address them as fast as they can, then let them accept, or rather bring in this platform that can be able to not only inform the citizens about step by step of what is happening within the election preparedness, which they did anyway, but especially the political parties. NASA has said that IEBC will not be able to run these elections. Right. I don't see that happening, because not that the commissioners, I mean IEBC also enjoys a security of tenure. It's a six-year one-term period. And the Constitution, I think in Article 140, presents what needs to be done in the event that commissioners have been deemed to be incompetent, or should be basically the removal of commissioners from office. It's going to be a long process which will not take place in the next 60 days. So NASA, in my view, and all the political players and all the people who will participate in this process need to begin thinking about how do we do this election with this current IEBC, number one. Number two, NASA was at the forefront of pushing out the former commission. And a special team was put in place, a joint parliamentary select committee, within our process, which was also safeguarded within the Constitution and other supporting legislative frameworks. What this, in my view, means is that, do we want to go back to the same joint select process to be able to bring in both Parliament, Senate, and the National Assembly to be able to generate a select committee? How long will this take? Because note that we are doing this within 60 days, which means that even in the 48th day, IEBC can say elections are happening on the 52nd day, because they have up to 60 days. So I think that we have a lot of work to do insofar as moving on to the next 58 days is concerned. Lots of lessons to be learned for IEBC, including even the process of recruiting its staff. We don't want to see people being killed because of elections. We don't want to lose IEBC officials. We don't want to lose Kenyans. We just want to have an election that we can be able to say, I'll go cast my vote and go back to work and wait for... and
it will be free, fair, and credible.
Exactly.
Dr. Mukwana, just before I come to you, Gugucha, already we've seen NASA say we want Wafula Chebukati to resign. We want Ezra Chiloba to have legal action taken against him. This team cannot conduct elections. Wafula Chebukati, on the other hand, says, I did not hear the court find any culpability on my individual, on my part as an individual. Where do we begin? Because this is a lot of pressure and a lot of back and forth again between IEBC and the opposition.
Thanks, Michelle. First of all, I empathize with the Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta, because in the decision of the Supreme Court, he was not found culpable in any way. In other words, they did not say that he was responsible for the problems that bedeviled the election.
Right.
So poor chap, he has done his bit. He has spent a lot of money. He has spent a lot of time, and he thought he had scored the goal, only to be told, hey guys, that was an offside goal.
You have to go back.
Okay? So I understand his displeasure, his discomfort, and he's clearly expressed it. Not in very comfortable style to some of us, but look, he is distressed, and that's to be understood. On the part of Honorable Raila Odinga, they have said that they are not going to the election in the 60 days with IEBC. That, to me, is an anticlimax of what the court gave them. Because believe you me, if you have lived in this country long enough, and if you understand Honorable Raila Odinga, he has been described here as a frontline fighter. He's clearly digging in. And when Honorable Raila digs in, be prepared for the long fight. It is not feasible to have the IEBC go home in 16 days. Constitutionally, it is not. What will happen is that they will dig in, and Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta, more specifically his deputy, is also digging in on the other side. So the risk that we run as a country is that 60 days will be here, they'll be fighting, and the country will be thrown into a constitutional crisis. If you lived in this country in the 90s, we had something similar to that, and we had to operate outside the constitution where the parliamentarians came together and formed the IPPG.
97.
In 97, am I right? Yes,
Yeah.
in 1997. And this then was their bypass to an impasse that had developed out of digging in. We might end up there. But before I proceed on that point, Michelle, allow me just to add a bit on what my colleague said here about the sealing of ballot boxes, that NASA also added an additional seal on the ballot boxes. I had the privilege of being a representative of the LSK as an observer, and I was in charge of, I supervised, I was in Kakamega County. I do not recall NASA having had
It's not possible.
the seals. It's not feasible.
Not possible.
In fact, between you and me, NASA did not have agents in all the stations. Forget about putting a seal. But maybe my colleague
Actually, I was a chief agent for a candidate in Embakasi Central, and in all the ballot boxes, they actually did put a seal.
Yes, so maybe my colleague had his experience, I had my experience, but that may not be applicable all across the country. So that cannot be used as an indicator.
Probably this was done in the swing counties.
Maybe, Number two, I want to say something about how the president has reacted. Michelle, under the Constitution, we have 3 arms of government, and this is what Kenyans must understand. These 3 arms of government have their own presidents. The head of government and the head of state is the president. He leads the executive. The second arm is the judiciary, and the president of that arm of government is the president of the Supreme Court. And the third one is parliament. These 3 arms must work in complementary with each other, but they cannot supplant the other. In other words, the executive cannot replace the judiciary, and vice versa. Now, in my view, even as the president hurts, he must also remind himself that the presidency, as envisaged in the Constitution, is the symbol of national unity.
And maybe perhaps before you continue, Dr. Bukwana, let's have Kenyans understand what we are speaking about. President Uhuru Kenyatta's remarks and remarks surrounding the court ruling by the Supreme Court have been termed as an attack on the judiciary. Let's first listen in to what President Uhuru Kenyatta had to say about that court ruling and about Chief Justice David Maraga.
Don't interfere, and don't think that because our friends shout and we keep quiet, that we are scared of you. No, we are not.
Na mimi nimeshangaa kwa sababu nafikiri Kenya ndio nchi ya kwanza duniani. Nchi ya kwanza ambao watu wachache ambao hawazidi 6 na kati yao 3 au 4 wameamua ya kwamba hawa ndio wana uwezo kushinda wananchi milioni 15. Watu 4 ati ndio watakuja waseme kulikuwa technicality, ati wananchi milioni 15 hawatarudia kura 6, watarudia kura 1. Sasa wewe jamani, hata ukiwa mjinga namna gani, jiulize. MCA amepigiwa kura, imekuwa transmitted. Na huyo mtu mwenyewe ndio wametuma majaji kila kona, 47 counties, ati kushuhudia kuapishwa kwa magavana.
So that is President Uhuru Kenyatta. They're reacting to that decision by the Supreme Court. You've had a lot of that, gentlemen. There was a lot more that was said even outside State House. Remarks that have not gone down very well with the Law Society of Kenya, with the Kenya Magistrates and Judges Association. Let me begin with you, Kagucha.
Yeah.
I was to come to you. Your thoughts on these remarks by the President, do they warrant or do they amount to wanton intimidation of the judiciary?
Now, in this country, not only in this country, issues of Supreme Court rulings are highly political. Because, for example, if you have to look at the time usually allowed for the Supreme Court to actually go through these cases, practically speaking, is really a time that is not sufficient or enough to ventilate into legal issues that may have arisen out of the just concluded election. And so what happens mainly is that it becomes a highly political process rather than legal. And so the outcome of every Supreme Court ruling, whether it invalidates or whether it upholds, is bound to attract a lot of political pronouncements and comments. And that is not anything different from what you saw in 2013. The side that loses in this kind of a case feels always that politics has gone against them, not always legally, but that the decision of the judges definitely has gone against the will of the people. And that you saw in 2013 happening from the other side. This time round, Jubilee has lost, and it is not anything different. That is why you hear the president, making the pronouncements that he's making. And one of the things I guess they will do when eventually, if they win this election, one of the things they will do is to then go back to this decision and ask, okay, so at what point, I mean, when we look at some of these forms that then were used to invalidate the election, then we want to see how was the voting done actually. In fact, they may even want to go and do the calculation, even the ballots or the votes that were counted in that area. But again, they may also win and just trash it and say it was Maraga's decision at that time. People have now spoken, and now we are going to move on. We will forget about that. But for now, you will see that this kind of pronouncements, because remember, we are now already in a political process.
But is it in order, Kagucha? This is a sitting president. Is it in order for him to have these pronouncements about the Supreme Court?
At this point, you wouldn't expect anything different from any political leader. You know he's a sitting president, but he's also the presidential candidate whose election, which he believes was won using the majority of Kenyans, has been invalidated. So you have to also have that in mind. He's not just the president, but he's also a candidate in this election. So, and his election has actually been invalidated. And so what would happen is not anything different from what you had happening just before even the Supreme Court started their sitting. You remember Raila Odinga saying that since the president talked at that time, they have not lost a case. And then again, you remember also now Raila saying that now the Supreme Court, it is your time to redeem yourself. It is your now time.
And he received a lot of flack from the president
himself. Of course he did, because it's a political process. And when he said it is your time to redeem your image from 2013, you again now see the judge is saying, oh, from our conscience and from 2013, we do not want again to be bashed. And why did the president say if we don't shout, it's not like we are fearing you? It's because already the opposition seems to have shouted and said, if you are not going to rule in this kind of a manner, then we will be bashing you. We will say you are not credible, And now he says, if they are saying that you are not credible and they are shouting if you rule against them, it's not like we cannot also shout. We can also shout from our side as politicians. So really, it is a political process. And what I would want to say again, if you look at the outcome of this election, this petition, what the president and the deputy have done, they have not just criticized the decision, but after accepting it, they have actually moved on. I have seen people telling them that accept and move on. What they have done is that they have accepted and they have moved on. How have they moved on?
I'll come back to you, Kagucha. I'll come back to you because we really need to, first of all, answer this question. Osido, do you agree with, Kagucha, first of all? Because the question is it in order for a sitting president, the defender of the Constitution, to utter the words he did about the Constitution, about the Supreme Court?
Michelle, from where I sit and speaking for many other Kenyans, I don't think it is right. But it is right to the extent that His Excellency the President is also a human being. And so you expect that when these kind of things happen, then a human being will behave in a particular manner. But note that there are people that have higher expectations. The good book says, to whom much is given, much is required. Yeah? So when you are a president and you have what is called the presidency comes with certain things. And that is why His Excellency the President is allowed to say certain things, behave in a certain manner, and not to say certain things and not to behave in a certain manner. And this, in my view, is now so unpresidential. Now, it is unpresidential to the extent of the manner in which his body language is speaking. Because even the day when, on Friday evening, he was at Burma Market, and so many things were said. If you look at Kenyans, because the Kenyans on Twitter, because we are so many, we are much more expressive in our social media platforms, you will see the kind of things that people are saying about our president. But not that social media is not just limited to Kenyans. Other people are watching this. And you also see people, my Ugandan friends are also sending this on WhatsApp pages and criticizing and ridiculing my president. How do you think as a Kenyan I feel when certain language is not so presidential to certain people who are supposed to be respectful to our country because of our sovereignty? The second thing, in my view, is the president's handlers. At this point, it becomes very hard to tell the president not to say certain things because he's a human being. But how do you take those things? Especially terms or words like, we shall respect, but we shall revisit. Accept and move on. You know, looking at 2013, people accepted it and they moved on.
But surely, if the decision is completely objective and legal, why would the issue of revisiting be a problem?
Precisely. Gentlemen, just a moment. Let's hear from Dr. Mukwana on this issue.
You know, Michelle, I have said here and I repeat that Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, as a person, is a very pleasant chap to deal with. That's a fact. Give it to him. I have also said that he's very conciliatory in the way he radiates with the public. However, a man is also judged by the company he keeps. Then you go to number 2. And he's so pent up with anger. I say this, Michelle. Tomorrow at 9, I'll be going to the High Court. I have a case of contempt of court. I received orders from my client. The fellow who was supposed to be performing what the court ordered has refused. And my client is frustrated. I'm rushing back to court and saying, look, can you help me enforce these orders? If the court refuses to enforce these orders, it means that there is no law and order. Let's bring it to the attack on the judiciary. The president of the Supreme Court must and should be respected, regardless of the decision he has made. You see, we have this saying in Kiswahili that mkuki kwa nguruwe ni mtamu, kwa binadamu ni mchungu. 2013, the decision went the Jubilee way. And oh my God, they said, accept and move on. And for the 5 years, it was yule mzee wa vitandawili, yule mzee wa nusu mkate. And the poor fellow Raila lived with it. Come 2017, and the shoe is on the other foot. The president says, I have accepted from one side of the mouth with due respect to the president. But on the other side, he's saying, when we come back, we will sort them out. Coming from a president, it's scary, I can assure you. Because the president is my president, whether I'm NASA or Jubilee. Whether you are NASA or Jubilee, he's the president. And I agree with Kevin when he says that to whom much is given, much is expected. So I do not agree at all that the president ought to speak the way he has spoken. It divides the country. And for your information, in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, when President Kibaki took power, was that the
Yes. That is it.
Because of the optimism that the citizens had that corruption was going to go away, the citizens copied from what their leaders were doing, and they started chasing down traffic policemen, arresting traffic policemen, for bribes. That is how the presidency is important in showing the example to the citizens on what should be done. Today, if the president digs in and the deputy dig in the way they're doing, their followers are similarly doing it.
Yeah.
And Raila and his followers will do similarly. Where we are headed, it can very easily burn this country. That's a fact. We were there in 2007. It takes a loose tongue to go there again in 2017. And let's not pretend that we are special. It is how we handle our interaction as citizens of this country that will build or destroy this country. So for me, it is a no to speak negatively over the decision of the court. After all, Michelle, when we disagree in a civilized democracy, where should we go to?
To the court.
If not court. Just a moment. And in this court, if we disagree 1,000,000 times, let's rush to court 1,000,000 times. So you cannot vilify me for having gone to court several times. And if you do not agree with the decision of the court, you appeal. Unfortunately for the Supreme Court, it's the final court. There's no appeal.
Yeah, it's true.
All right,
So one of the points I disagree with Daktari is where he says that you should not criticize the decision of the court. The decisions of the courts are critiqued, and as a senior counsel, one of the things that you must always do every day is to critique the decisions of judges all the times, and judges know that. The only thing that, Michelle, I wouldn't agree with is to critique the judge himself.
To ridicule, not critique.
To critique, to ridicule. To put the judge in a bad light. That shouldn't happen. For sure, that shouldn't happen.
Right.
Even the president should not say anything negative about Maraga as a person. But the decision of the court is something that we must all engage in, is something that we must always critique, especially now after it is out. And the issue of revisiting again, it is not revisiting the judges, it is revisiting the decision of the court. Are you getting it? Michelle, let me just put this point forward.
They will have to change the judiciary after the next
Just a point. No, I don't think it's about changing the judiciary. You know, when we are talking about decisions, Daktari, when we are talking about decisions of the court from lower courts all the way up to Court of Appeal, or maybe up to High Court, even Court of Appeal, all these, how do we revisit those judgments? We revisit those judgments by appealing, isn't it? Yeah. We appeal those judgments in higher courts. When it is a court, when it is a Supreme Court, there is no opportunity of ever appealing. And so what the presidency must do, and I think they seem to have done, is to actually move on, as it has been rightly put, and as they rightly put it in 2013, move on. And how have they moved on? Those guys have already covered 4 counties as we are talking. The first night after the decision was made, when guys were in celebratory mood, the guys were already in Bama, Nairobi County. They went to Nakuru, they have gone to Kajiado, and they have gone to Narok to campaign and to now try and bring back their guys back into their support. Now, they are moving on. But the issue of revisiting is not revisiting the judges, and they shouldn't, by the way. If that is what the president meant, then that should not happen. You should not come back to Maraga himself. You should not come back to all the other judges. What they should probably come back to is to look at this judgment. How was this judgment arrived at? And by the way, this is an issue that is going to be of interest globally.
Isn't that something that is likely to be seen in 20 days when the full verdict of the judges is given?
We are actually going to see even scholars all the way from London, all the way from America, coming to study this judgment. And people are going to write even doctoral theses based on this judgment that has been made
just a moment,
from the Supreme Court.
We have to wind up. So let me give everybody closing comments to say what they have to say. Osido.
For me, I see 3 things that are going to happen. One is that we expect lots of court petitions rather from the counties. I liked the part where the president was saying, why are we only invalidating the presidential one? I already am aware of about 4 counties that have issues tomorrow and Tuesday. The governors are going to present petitions to court. And given the precedence that has already been set by the Supreme Court, you don't expect anything other than a nullification of all those other elections. The second thing is I agree that people need to go out there and visit as many counties, up to the 48 counties, including the diaspora. Because the diaspora is also a county on its own. But the messaging, I think the messaging is something that we really need to be very careful about, because if we are going to have this kind of undertones in even 20 counties, then trust me, this country will never be the same again. But we expect that people are going to say the right things that they need to say, at what point and to which people. And then the third thing is I've been an advocate of requesting His Excellency the President and the former Prime Minister to meet, and I'll continue requesting them that if it is okay for them, even in this political environment and this heated context.
Kaguche doesn't seem to agree with that.
No, they should, but it would not be possible.
Anytime they meet, Michelle, this country just, like we've seen in the last few days, the country just is just more or less like a refreshing atmosphere that the country gets, and we've seen it happening with now the Maraga issue, and I think that this needs to move at now.
Are you pushing for Nusumkate or something?
No, I'm not even speaking for anyone. I'm just speaking for myself as a voter.
Yes, they are taking your time. Very briefly, please, we need to wind up.
But that then the country can be able to move on in a much more peaceful manner, and that we just love ourselves.
All right, Dr. Mukwana.
Michelle, my request to the NASA leadership is this. Kindly, do not dig in for a battle over IEBC. Be grateful that the Supreme Court has already made a decision. In any case, Chebukati has admitted that indeed there are internal problems. And he says that we only came in 7 months ago, but nothing changed with the Secretariat. That in itself is an admission that there are problems within the Secretariat.
Right.
So kindly, let Chebukati do the internal housekeeping and make sure that things are right. Of course, I understand that now NASA doesn't trust IBC, but in view of what is happening, and to save this country from unnecessary tension, they must, for God's sake, not dig in and lead us through so much trouble. Finally, my urge is to the President. Be above everybody else. Show the way. We appreciate that you are hurting. As I've said, you were not to blame at all as far as the court is concerned for the mess. However, you ought it to everybody, NASA or Jubilee supporter, to be above. Let your juniors insult each other if they wish, but for you, Mr. President, you are our president. However much you hurt, you must not use a language that intimidates judges, that intimidates other people, and which alienates the rest of the country from the fulcrum of this country.
My final point. Number one, the ruling of the Supreme Court has opened several things. Number one, as he says, it has opened a Pandora's box in where we are going to have an avalanche of suits, petitions in court. That we are likely to see more now. Number two, the political environment is going to be more acidic than ever before in this country. And I have to say, this is my prediction as an analyst, that it is going to be more acidic than it has been before. So Kenyans need to brave themselves now for a very, very long battle between the two political parties, political divide. And lastly, one of the things that should happen and must happen is that, as Chebukati said, those IEBC staff who are culpable must be taken, a step must be taken against them in very, very serious ways. If, for example, you did not sign a form and you are returning officer, Chebukati had already warned before and said that everyone shall carry their own cross. So indeed, if we were watching in court and we saw that a form had been brought without signing it, if for sure you never signed a form, a very serious step must be taken to ensure that that is fixed, so that then as we move forward, actually if really you had a problem, we don't expect to see those people conducting the election, those people who may have led us to that kind of a problem. So those staff who did not do the right thing, whether they were temporary staff, whether they were permanent staff, a step must be taken against them, so that then we can fix that problem as we move forward. But asking for the resignation of the commission is definitely going to bring us into another quagmire, which resolving it will again require another more than 60 days.
All right. So we will keep watching the happenings in the country. Gentlemen, many thanks for speaking to us. We're speaking to John Kaguchia, who is a political commentator, and we've also been speaking to Kevin Osido, governance expert. Last but not least, Dr. Alutalala Mukwana, who is a High Court advocate. Many thanks, gentlemen, for joining us on Kivumbi 2017. It is now 4 minutes past the hour on the early morning edition of Kivumbi 2017. We'll take a short commercial break. Do stay with us when news coming up at the top of the hour. My name is Michelle Ngele. Do have a good morning.